Engaged research has been the foundation of my career. I wanted to become a lawyer and also to pursue a career as an educator in order to create change in my community. So it served as an invaluable tool for me to gain insights related to the experiences of those in the community, to make connections with those in the community, and make an impact in my community. Most recently, I worked on the campaign for prison phone justice. That particular campaign focused on the high cost of prison phone calls. After waiting over a decade with a petition before the FCC related to bringing regulation to the prison phone call industry, finally a period for public comments opened up, which it was a dream come true for an elderly grandmother whose grandson who was incarcerated in a different state. So that meant she had to make a choice constantly between meeting her daily basic, needs and being able to remain in contact with her grandson who she loved. But she's not alone. There's too many families across the United States that face that same dilemma. So with the period opening up for the FCC, it was an opportunity to shed light on how families are impacted. With over 2 million children with an incarcerated parent, children are impacted. Families are impacted, especially when their incarcerated loved ones are in a prison facility almost 100 miles from home. So I give that to set the backdrop of how action research served as an invaluable tool. Well, change is in the works. It's one of those things where it's been a long time coming, but the change is on its way. So first, there's a change related to the call costs of long distance calls, those interstate calls. There was just a period that was open up for public comments to address state and county and jail costs. So when I talk about the research that we were able to do, it was conducting a listening session to hear the voices of people who are directly impacted by this crisis. So instead of just saying as an academic, I think this is an issue, I can pull together a great literature review. How are people impacted on the ground? What does it feel like to look at the caller ID and say, I can't accept the call today from my uncle, my nephew, or my brother? What does that mean for families? So it really gave us a glimpse of what families were experiencing on a daily basis. So we received feedback of everything from this is a way for families to build connections related to parenting, of how people can stay connected to their children. So a voice of the people that we wouldn't have otherwise heard. Action research also played a vital role as we looked at the future of juvenile justice reform, to be able to hear from parents and community members. How are young people impacted by the current juvenile justice system? Should it be the last resort? Should it be the first resort to put someone in secure detention? And we were able to hear from family members and community members to say, no, actually juvenile justice needs to go back to the direction of its original intent, which is rehabilitation and restoration. So we were able to get insights and ideas on what type of programming would support young people outside of the prison gates or outside of being incarcerated. Engaging in community forums, using survey research, and then also on the ground, going to some of the facilities that were doing innovative work, like the evening reporting centers. So instead of being in secure detention, a young person could go to evening reporting center and get the support that they needed. Or otherwise working with the community mentors and navigators. What's that process of mentorship and building a circle of support around young people? So getting new insights of what was working. I think in a practical way, the first step is to tear down the four walls of a university. Because oftentimes we can find ourselves in our offices and classrooms, but really the work on the ground is taking place outside of our institutions. So for me, it was twofold. Both breaking down those walls and saying, let's get engaged in the community. So there were times when I told my students, hey, meet me at Golden Time instead of meeting me in the classroom. Golden Time is just a small coffee shop that really is a community hub and a place where you can meet elected officials, civil rights leaders, community members, and have an engaging conversation. I think the second piece is in tearing down the walls, saying this is your home. Now, there were plenty of times in the Community Justice Project where we hosted programming inside of the university. That way people could become accustomed to saying, I can come here. This is a place where I can engage. This is a place where I can feel at home. So in that way, we hosted the Community Justice Project Forum called How Are the Children, related to children's issues. We also responded to issues in the news and media, whether it was related to voting rights, related to housing issue, related to criminal justice. We were responding to some of the issues as they were unfolding. Time moving in higher education is by semester, fall, spring, J-term, summer. And it also moves by, hey, we have lecture tonight or lecture in the morning. But what's happening in the community is life. a lived experience. So if you talk about research, that's looking at drawing in what I like to call the voice of the people. I think oftentimes research is limited to just a traditional notion of what's a peer-reviewed article or what goes into the upcoming journal. But truly, I think research and looking at the 21st century of where we are with social media and where we are with things unfolding moment by moment will require for us to be innovative. So maybe it's just important that I write a blog about what's happening now related to social change movements, as important as it is as publishing my next law review article. So I think a part of, as we think about it, we also will have to think about the hierarchy of how we value research. And that research can not only just be a literature review, or not only, I think the other hierarchy that we also have present is a quantitative piece versus a qualitative piece. And if we look at the qualitative piece for research, that's truly when we'll get to the point of hearing and learning about the lived experiences of people. And that's when we'll get to the point of true community engagement as well, because it'll go beyond just some qualifier of what's happening, how do we quantify it, to let me just listen, let me just hear, not only with my mind and my ears, but with my heart, of what's happening in the world around me. I'm optimistic. To make that type of change happen, I think it's going to take an academic world where academics ourselves are reframing the notion of who we are and how we write and where our audience is. Is our audience just the person who will receive our article in the mail? Or is our audience also someone who may engage with our LinkedIn blog, or they may engage with a Facebook post? So I think it's for us of thinking about creating change in a multimedia platform. And for me, it's been a steep learning curve because I'm the type I could barely cut on my computer. And now my students are talking about hashtags, handles, and tweets, and I'm just like, pause for a moment. But I think at this point in time, we have to engage with the things that are available to us in our toolbox. I think the other piece of using research to make systems change is what motivated me to write my book. Because as I thought about what is available in the toolbox of resources that I have, that's what compelled me to conduct the research that I did, of trying to find out what were our current civil rights pioneers, those lawyers today, who are working on topics of everything ranging from economic development to changing practices in education. So what tools are they using? And what are their leadership characteristics? So as I began to do that type of research, it was really focusing on how could I do my work more effectively. And the common denominator for each of them is that they were moving beyond their university, beyond the walls of that institution that I talked about, tearing down the four walls, being engaged in the community, helping to mobilize the community, and also engaging in a process of empowerment, of that we can't lead change unless we lead it together. I think there are risks in taking any non-traditional approach, but I think the rewards far outweigh the risk. In the sense of, I think the first natural risk is people are going to say, you're doing things different. We don't do things that way. But I think that's been my domain since I was a child, of kind of who I am, to be willing to take on a challenge and try to do something different. And my hope is, by taking on this challenge, that I'll open up doors for other researchers to say that it doesn't have to be just this one path, this one size fits all. Find your voice, find the issues that you're passionate about, and use by all the resources available to you, get that message out. Whether you're posting some new article on Huffington Post, or if you're doing an interview like I'm doing today, to lift your voice about the experiences that you had and what works and what doesn't work, that we can learn from each other. Well, I think one of the first steps, under the direction of the founder and director of the Community Justice Project, where I formerly worked, was going out. Professor Levy-Pounds went out to build the relationships. So the relationships with the key civil rights leaders, the relationships in the community. That was step one. And that way we were able to build trust to say, we're here, we're trying to support this process of change. Tell us what the issues are. Like, for instance, in the Community Justice Project, we never went out and actively pursued an issue. Each semester, I literally had no idea what would unfold. But I was there and I told my students, let's avail ourselves to the opportunity, because we're here not exercising power over a community, but we're here in a partnership. The only thing that we offer is a specific tool set, which is our oral advocacy, our research skills, our analytical skills, but we're using these tools to bring forth change. So how do you build a partnership? So I appreciate it as my mentor and as my first formal job in academia is that Professor Levy-Pounds modeled the way to show that the first thing that you have to do is engage and build that trust with the community. That was the social capital and the human capital that continued to thrust our partnerships forward. Because for too many instances, there's always this notion that an academic institution is coming in to study a community. But truly, it's not about studying a community. It's about building a better world and promoting the common good. And we only can do that when we're all at the table together. Truly, when I think about relationships, it's an essence for me of something that's ongoing. Now, for me personally, I live in the community where I serve. So if I look at relationships, I'm stopped at the local grocery store and ask, well, what are you doing about this issue? And what do you believe about this? So for me, I believe relationships evolve organically. So a part of the relationship building for us in the Community Justice Project was building relationships with some of the community partners who are working on similar issues. That way it would be an ongoing engagement that we would continue to have. So I think a part of it is never stopping saying, well, we finished this project, it was a great partnership, but looking at the ongoing nature of how all of these issues, at the heart of them, are social justice. So those relationships are critical that we can continue to have a feedback loop, we can continue to have coordination, and we can continue to engage and mobilize on the ground. Maybe potentially having a disconnect between what the researcher is seeking to discover and the lived experience of the community is this notion, and I think Professor Gerald Lopez explains it quite well in his work related to building the problem-solving center that he's been working on as a model. And a part of it is that research doesn't necessarily need to validate someone's lived experience. That research truly is gathering that story and then letting the people, and I think that's a notion of kind of people power, whether you hear that from Saul Alinsky and his community organizing model or from Miles Horton and his sense of the Highlander model, of that Miles Horton says something that I still think is very profound that I talk to my students about time and time again, is get the people together and the ideas will come from them. So a part of it is, and I'm summarizing that, a part of it is then that if we allow people to help define the problem, that they can also define the solution in a practical way. So that moves beyond the notion that we oftentimes hear, is it evidence-based? But truly the evidence is a community member saying, hey, I've experienced this, and here are my thoughts. And someone else saying, well, I experienced it too, and here are my thoughts. So I think it's creating a forum for an exchange of ideas. So when I look at myself as a researcher, I look at myself as more of a facilitator to gain new insights. And in some ways, I also then draw in previous literature, previous research, to help only enhance the experience of what possible solutions could be. And I think an example of that, a practical example, is that in the Community Justice Project, we initially conducted research to find out what were the top issues or what are the circumstances that were impacting the St. Paul community, African American community, related to quality of life. And one of the things that they said was, we're concerned about young people and we're concerned about them having jobs. So what was the byproduct of that? Not to say, is that evidence-based? Let's go back and research this again from those survey results. Was truly, let's think about what type of program models would address that need. And that's how we discovered some of the ideas related to Homeboy Industries as a social enterprise to employ some of those that may have had a run-in with the law enforcement or have been involved in gangs but need a second chance. We all need those. And that's how Brotherhood Inc. evolved. So I think that gives an example of community concerns touching with research and then coming up with practical solutions. So inspired by Homeboy Industries in LA, you now have Brotherhood Inc. in St. Paul. I think the call to action would be to connect your professional discipline with the issues that are unfolding around you. I think a practical call to action is that the world is changing. The world is changing rapidly. So can we then use the skills that we have, the gifts and talents that we have within our hands to make a difference in the world? That's a challenge for each and every one of us.